Good morning, everyone, and so lovely to see you all both online and in the Zendo. Thank you so much, Kondo. So what a wonderful way to start our day together. My name is Jisei, and I'm a senior student at the Village Zendo. I'm speaking from South Burlington, Vermont. It's a beautiful day here with a hint of fall in the air. Some early morning layers of mist when I looked out, kind of floating over all the tall grasses and quite beautiful. So since summer ongo, I've been thinking of the well-known Buddhist story of Kisa Gotami. So I thought I would talk about it today. It was the first Buddhist story that I heard coming into practicing with the Village Zendo, and at the same time, Buddhist chaplaincy training. So I've been thinking about what does this Buddhist parable teach us about life, about practice? So here goes. So Gotami was born in a very poor family in the famous city of Shravasti in North India. And since she was extremely lean and thin, people called her Kisa Gotami. She married into a rich family there, but was very unhappy. Coming from a poor family, she was taunted all the time, and also, as she was childless, she had to constantly hear caustic and cutting comments. But after a few years, her fortune changed. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. But the happiness of having a child did not last long. When the child was 2 or 3 years old, he died. The child was the cause of all of her respect and honor in the family. And his death was unbearable for her. She became extremely unhappy. She started lamenting, holding the child to her heart, and then just going around the village with this just agony and crying. The people asked her, said, it's time to go to the cremation ground. But she asked them to call in a good doctor who could bring her dead child to life by giving the child some medicine. People were at a complete loss as to how to console her. And then a kind person suggested that she should go to the Buddha, who was very compassionate and also a great physician. The Buddha at that time was dwelling in the Vedavana monastery, weeping and wailing and embracing her dead child. Kisa Gotami went to the Buddha. She laid the dead child at the feet of the Buddha and began to pray to him, beseeching him to bring her son back to life. The Buddha saw her plight and asked her to go to the city and get a pinch of mustard seeds from any family where no one had died. Feeling happy and hopeful, Kisa Gotami went to the city to get mustard seeds from such a family, but she could not find even a single family where no one had died. Having gone around to all the houses, she felt tired, and then she realized that it is the law of nature for every being to die. So it was to teach this that the Buddha had sent her on this errand. And having realized this truth, she gave the dead body of her son for the last rites and went back to seek refuge in the Buddha. The Buddha taught her Dharma. She was ordained into the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of nuns. And as a result of her great accumulation of paramis, of virtues, in her previous birth, she practiced Vipassana seriously and became a Shrotapanna and then an Arahant. She taught Vipassana to many suffering women and helped them come out of suffering. The Buddha declared her the most foremost among those of his female disciples who wore rough clothes. So Kisa Gotami was overwhelmed by grief and could not face the reality of her son's death. We might say that she could not face the reality of what it means to be human. Old age, sickness, and death. The Buddha gave her the task of going from house to house to every family in the village to get a mustard seed from a family that did not know death. There was no family that had not been touched by death. So the Buddha sets Kisa Gotami on her journey of self-discovery. No one could do it for her. The Buddha tells us not to look outside of ourselves. We are to learn from our own experience what works and what doesn't, what rings true and what doesn't. Zen practice encourages us to find our own voice, confidence, and strength. Kisa Gotami's suffering isolates her. Her search for a mustard seed takes her from family to family, connecting her to those in the village. Her search ultimately connects her to the reality of her son's death. She learns what it means to be human in a human body. Old age, sickness, and death. There is no medicine to bring her dead son back to life. Cracked open, she is no longer alone in her suffering, but with others, taking part in the life of the village. Roshi Ankyo asked and addressed the question, why Zen? In her moving talk last Sunday. Roshi pointed out that there are many wonderful religions, traditions, and practices. For those of us who are Zen practitioners, for whom the language of Zen forms resonate, our practice is to quiet and still our minds, to develop awareness in the present moment with whatever arises and passes, not excluding anything. Those are Dogen's encouragement to us in a teaching that I read, not excluding anything and with no designing thoughts or worries, in touch with reality, giving up our fixed and conditioned ideas about ourselves and others. We aspire to move beyond the small, limited self to a larger life and spacious self. We learn, as Kisa Gotami did, that everything is always changing. There is no solid self, no ground to stand on. We experience a home within, so to speak, centered in awareness, moment by moment. And this quality of strength and confidence frees us and develops over time. Dogen Zenji said, "Practice is enlightenment, nothing to grasp hold of outside of ourselves." So Kisa Gotami came to realize that death is a part of life, of the human experience. I imagine her moment of realization, perhaps as a dam bursting, a resistance tightness giving way, a breaking open, softening, and then healing tears. Broken, whole. So I first heard the story of Kisa Gotami when I started practicing with the Village Zendo, and at that same time began Buddhist chaplaincy training. I remember connecting with her story in a very personal and immediate way. I was unaware at that time of the tremendous grief that I held in my body. Unaware. It was a way in which you could say I was unconscious. And that is what disassociation is, moments of slipping away when confronted with what feels unsafe, a way that we can avoid having to deal with that anxiety or shame or whatever it is that comes up. Just check out into the ether. My father died before I was 2 years old. My uncle died the year before, and both died in sudden, violent accidents. Here, one moment, and literally hours later, they were gone. My mother and family and the culture and the community that I grew up in was extremely stoic. My brothers and I weren't allowed to talk about my father's death or how it happened. No one did. The deaths, the details were kept secret. No grieving, no emotions allowed. And the big message was, tough it out. Life is for the living. Death, not allowed. You can't eliminate death from the human experience. It is an integral part of the human experience. It brings sadness, and sometimes it also brings joy and intimacy and just profound ways that feel so lovely and important. So in my family, death lurked in the dark shadows, hidden from view. So we all have the circumstances, conditions, families that we were born into and grew up in. And I imagine that all of us here have worked through things and have things to work through. How about you? I didn't know what was hidden, not allowed in me. Therapy certainly was, I started a few years early and maybe brought me a little insight, but I had a long way to go. So in my first year or so of zazen, there were periods of sitting on retreat at the Grail and at 588 Broadway, in which my grief would well up all of a sudden and completely overwhelm me. And I cried audibly, sobbing through periods. Tears, snot rolled down my face. I don't know why, but it didn't cross my mind to leave the Zendo and perhaps go into the bathroom. And I remember one Zazenkai in particular, when everyone in the Zendo listened to me sobbing for 30 minutes. And though I was a very private person, having been raised in this stoic and unemotional family, I felt held and nourished. It was okay in this community to be who I was. And that was very different from the family and community I grew up in. But instinctively, I felt the potential for healing, that the Zendo was a place that could hold my grief. I remember opening the door at 588 Broadway many times and instantly feeling drawn in, enveloped by the sense of incense, the smell of incense, and voices. Right, the voices of aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, teachers. Whatever I needed, I felt met. This was a place of healing. It was a place for me to get in touch with those voices in me, to offer others when they needed to be met in some particular way. So in chaplaincy training, there was a Jungian orientation. We worked with images and wrote monthly reflections on the images that were coming forward in our lives. So hearing the story of Kisa Gotami, an image came forward for me of myself carrying a huge, heavy bag of grief. I imagined an immense bag slung over my shoulder, a Santa's bag full. When difficult emotions would come up, I learned to investigate, hold up a light, and examine. And with each arising of grief, anger, shame, anxiety, to name a few, I brought whatever that was triggered, whatever came up out of the bag and into the light. And over time, the bag lightened. And over time, my story changed and continues to change. No more bag over my shoulder. One of my favorite quotes is from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. What you bring forth will set you free, and what you don't bring forth will destroy you. Zazen, paying attention, being present, quiets our minds and brings us into our bodies, into reality being more authentic and more fully ourselves, being more fully human. Kisa Gotami was alone and suffering when she denied the death of her son. Her death denial, inconsolable grief, walled her off, giving her the illusion of being separated from others. When she realized that her son had died, that every household had lost a family member, she was able to begin her real grieving, the going through that brings healing. That brought her into the place of belonging, the human family. And this belonging and connection is comforting and also joyful. The more we find in ourselves what we allow, I think, increases our capacity to care and love, feel compassion for ourselves and others. The Buddha's story parallels Kisa Gotami's, and I'm sure you know it well, most of you. The Buddha left the palace, embarking on a journey to learn about all that he had been protected from in the palace: old age, sickness, and death. And ultimately, his search to find a way to end suffering and wake up. And after waking up, he eventually taught others the way to end suffering and wake up. The Four Noble Truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that frees us from suffering, the Eightfold Path. Kisa Gotami was taught by the Buddha, ordained as a bhikkhu, and spent the rest of her life serving, helping people who suffered to end their suffering. So I'm going to end with a verse that I wrote. Meeting what is, moment by moment, the heart that is open is the heart that can be touched, and the heart that touches. In this together, loving ourselves, loving others, loving action.